The police officer stood at my door, his expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. His partner, a man in a dark suit, loomed behind him, his gaze fixed on me. The air felt thick with tension, as if a storm was brewing right inside my small, cluttered apartment. "Where is Owen?" the officer asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority, yet tinged with uncertainty. I blinked, trying to process the question. Owen. Why were they looking for Owen? My mind raced as I searched for an answer, something that would explain why two men, one in uniform, were standing at my doorstep, demanding to see my son. Owen. He's right here, I finally said, gesturing vaguely toward the room behind me, my voice faltering. The officer's eyes narrowed, his confusion deepening. "This is Owen," he repeated, as if the name itself held some hidden meaning he couldn't quite grasp. I nodded slowly, feeling a creeping sense of dread. "Yes, Owen is right here," I confirmed, though the certainty in my voice was more for my own reassurance than his. My heart was pounding now, an ominous rhythm that echoed in my ears. "I'm Ian," I added, as if that would somehow clarify the situation. "I'm 42 years old, a struggling comic artist. I have a wife who's 2 years younger, and she keeps our household afloat with her steady income. We couldn't survive on what I make alone. I've thought about getting a part-time job, but who would hire a middle-aged guy like me?" The officer didn't respond to my attempt at small talk. He wasn't here for pleasantries. Instead, he thrust a document toward me, the paper crinkling in his hand. "We have an arrest warrant for Owen," he said, his voice hardening into something that left no room for doubt or negotiation. I stared at the document, the words blurring before my eyes. Arrest warrant. Owen. Fraud. The terms seemed foreign, as if they belonged to someone else's life, some other unfortunate soul who had stumbled into trouble. Owen, committing fraud. There must be a mistake. I stammered, my voice rising in pitch as panic began to claw at the edges of my sanity. But the officer wasn't interested in my disbelief. He wasn't here to debate the facts. "It's no mistake," he said, his tone firm and unyielding. "Your son, Owen, is accused of swindling $300,000. My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the walls closing in as the weight of those words settled on my shoulders. $300,000. Owen. It was impossible. My son wasn't capable of such a thing. He wasn't even human. The absurdity of the situation made my head spin. "That can't be true," I whispered, more to myself than to the officer. My stomach twisted painfully, a sharp reminder that this was real, that this nightmare was happening right now, in my home. "Can I take some stomach medicine?" I asked, my voice shaky, my hands trembling as I tried to keep from collapsing under the stress. "No," the officer replied curtly. "Are you trying to destroy evidence?" I blinked, the question catching me off guard. Destroy evidence? What evidence? There was no fraud. There couldn't be. Owen was just a... I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of confusion. "I'm not," I insisted. "Besides, there's no evidence to destroy, since there was no fraud." The officer's eyes narrowed further, suspicion etched into every line of his face. He didn't believe me. Why would he? To him, I was just another parent trying to protect their delinquent child. He didn't know the truth. How could he? I forced myself to move, my body feeling sluggish, as if I were wading through thick, suffocating mud. I walked to the kitchen, every step a monumental effort, and took my stomach medicine. The pills felt like they were stuck in my throat, refusing to go down, but eventually, I managed to swallow them. When I called out to Owen in the back room, there was no response. I wasn't surprised. How could there be? But I still had to go through the motions, had to pretend that this was all some terrible misunderstanding that would be cleared up any moment now. I returned to the entrance, my heart heavy with dread. The officer was still there, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You haven't been in contact with Owen, have you?" he asked, his tone accusatory. I shook my head, feeling the weight of his suspicion bearing down on me. "I haven't," I said, the words feeling hollow and empty. Are there many victims?" The officer's expression darkened. "Well, it's $300,000. Owen seems to be quite the smooth talker. Everyone trusted him and handed over their money." I swallowed hard, the bile rising in my throat. "Everyone believed Owen's words," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. How could this be happening? Owen was just a hamster. A beloved pet, yes, but not a person, not someone who could commit fraud. The officer's next words sent a fresh wave of panic crashing over me. "Now your son will go to trial, but if you pay some money beforehand, his sentence can be lightened." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "Pay money? For Owen?" My voice trembled, the absurdity of the situation threatening to overwhelm me. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake, some elaborate prank that had gone too far. "How much?" I asked, my voice small and defeated. "There's no fixed amount for these things," the officer replied, his tone oddly casual, as if we were discussing the price of groceries. "But people usually pay around $100,000. How much can you pay?" $100,000. I repeated, my voice cracking. $100,000. I can't pay that. I might be able to take some from our savings, but... "Why not sell this house?" the officer suggested, his voice cold and calculating. "It looks like a new condo." "Sell the house?" I echoed, my mind reeling. If we sold the house, we'd have nowhere to live. My parents live far away, and I can't rely on my elderly parents. I trailed off, my thoughts spiraling out of control. The officer was getting impatient, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in closer. "It's for your son. Don't you care about him?" "It's not that," I began, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain the truth? How could I make him understand that this was all a terrible, impossible mistake? Just then, a noise came from the back room. A rattling, familiar sound that sent a jolt of panic through me. The officer's head snapped toward the source of the noise, his eyes narrowing further. "What's that noise? Is Owen there?" "Yes," I replied, my voice shaking. "He is. Just a moment, I'll bring him." I forced myself to move, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I went to the room where Owen was, my heart pounding in my chest. When I returned to the entrance, I was holding a small cage in my hands. Inside, a white hamster looked around curiously before starting to run on his wheel. "This is Owen," I said, my voice trembling as I held up the cage for the officer to see. The officer's confusion turned to anger, his face flushing with frustration. "Where is Owen?" he demanded, his voice rising. I pointed to the hamster, my hands shaking. "Right here. This is Owen." The officer's eyes widened in disbelief, his anger giving way to shock. "Don't lie," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "You could be charged with perjury." "I'm telling the truth," I insisted, my voice cracking under the strain. "This is my son, Owen. My wife and I couldn't have children, so we raised him as our son." The officer's face contorted with fury. "How dare you mock the police?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the small apartment. "Bring out Owen immediately." "I'm telling you, this is Owen," I repeated, my voice breaking as tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't believe this was happening. How could this be real? How could a simple misunderstanding have spiraled into this nightmare? As the officer and I continued to argue, the front door opened and my wife, Willow, stepped inside. Her eyes widened in surprise as she took in the scene before her. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with concern. I quickly explained the situation, my voice trembling as I recounted the bizarre events of the past few minutes. Willow listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she turned to the officer, her face calm and composed. "This hamster is Owen," she said, her voice firm and steady. But the officer still didn't believe us. "You two are obviously in cahoots," he accused, his voice shaking with anger. "How long are you going to keep lying?" "We're not lying," Willow replied, her voice calm but resolute. "This is Owen, our son." At that moment, Willow's eyes narrowed slightly as she took a closer look at the officer and the man in the suit. Something about them seemed off, something that didn't quite add up. "Aren't you the ones lying?" she asked, her voice sharp and cutting. "The police would know that we don't have a child if they checked." The officer's anger flared, his face flushing red. "Are you insulting the police?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. "Do you want to be arrested for obstructing official duties? Can you show us your police badge?" Willow asked, her voice calm but insistent. "That's not the issue here," the officer snapped, his frustration growing by the second. "Bring out Owen first." "The police are supposed to show their badges when asked by citizens," Willow replied, her voice steady and unyielding. The officer hesitated for a moment, then quickly flashed his badge before shoving it back into his pocket. But Willow wasn't satisfied. "Which precinct are you from?" she asked, her voice calm but demanding. "What's your phone number?" "I'm Smith from the Los Angeles precinct," the officer replied, his voice shaky. I forgot the phone number." "Los Angeles precinct, right?" Willow repeated, her eyes narrowing. "I'll call to confirm." She reached for her phone, her expression determined. "There's no need to call the precinct over something so trivial," the officer protested, panic creeping into his voice. "Then tell me your ID number," Willow pressed, her eyes locked on his. "My ID number is 54321, the officer stammered, his face pale. "And you?" Willow asked, turning to the man in the suit. "I'm 23456, the man replied, his voice just as shaky. Willow frowned, her suspicion deepening. "That's strange. ID numbers are supposed to be 7 digits long. We were recently transferred, so we haven't memorized them yet," the officer said quickly, his voice faltering. "ID numbers don't change," Willow pointed out, her voice sharp. "And no police officer would fail to answer immediately. Besides, police officers are supposed to know their ID numbers by heart." At that moment, our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, walked by, her eyes lighting up when she saw us standing in the doorway. "Oh, Owen. Long time no see," she said, her voice cheerful as she waved to the hamster in the cage. Owen, recognizing her, squeaked happily, his tiny paws tapping against the bars of the cage. The officer's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the interaction. "Is this hamster really Owen?" he asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "Yes, of course," Mrs. Jenkins replied, her smile warm and genuine. "He's Ian and Willow's beloved son." After Mrs. Jenkins left, the two fake officers were clearly rattled. Their confident facade was crumbling, and they were starting to realize that their scam was falling apart. Naming a pet like a human. "It's not that unusual," I said, watching their growing panic with a mix of relief and disbelief. "Besides, Owen is our family, not just a pet." Realizing they were in trouble, the two men tried to leave, but Willow wasn't about to let them go so easily. "It's not a mistake," she said, her voice firm. "The arrest warrant had our address. You were trying to scam us, right? You're imagining things." "We wouldn't do that," the officer protested, but his voice was shaky, his confidence shattered. "Can you give me your gun number?" Willow asked, her eyes narrowing as she took a step closer to the men. "There's no need for that," the officer said, trying to deflect the question. "That's a clear violation," Willow stated firmly, her voice cutting through the officer's weak excuses. "Police officers are supposed to know and provide their gun numbers when asked. If they don't, it's almost always a scam." Unable to take the pressure anymore, the man in the suit tried to bolt, but just then, real police officers arrived, their flashing lights casting a harsh glow over the scene. The two fake officers were promptly arrested, their scam completely unraveled. Willow saluted the real officers with a loud voice, her tone filled with relief and gratitude. "Thank you very much." The real officers returned the salute, their expressions serious as they led the fake officers away. As they were being taken into custody, one of the fake officers murmured in disbelief, "Really? What on earth?" Willow turned to me, a small, satisfied smile on her face. "I can answer my ID and gun number immediately," she said, her voice calm and confident. The fake officers turned pale, realizing too late that they had targeted the wrong people. "Yes, Willow is a police officer. When I went to take my stomach medicine earlier, I had called her, and she had contacted the precinct before coming home first. Thanks to her quick thinking, the criminals were safely taken away, and the danger had passed." I collapsed from the relief, my body finally giving in to the exhaustion and stress of the past hour. "Are you okay?" Willow asked, concern lacing her voice as she reached out to help me up. I looked up at her, my heart swelling with gratitude and love. "You were amazing, Willow," I said, my voice filled with admiration. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Willow smiled, her eyes softening as she squeezed my hand. "It's okay, Ian. We're safe now, and that's all that matters." Later, it was revealed that the two perpetrators were part of a large fraud group that had been targeting vulnerable people across the city. Thanks to Willow's quick actions, other members of the group were also arrested, eventually leading to the capture of the ringleader. It was a significant victory for the police, and I was supposed to receive a letter of appreciation for my role in alerting Willow. At first, I was hesitant. "All I did was call you, Willow," I said, unsure if I deserved any recognition. "Is it really okay for me to accept this?" "It's fine," Willow reassured me, her voice warm and encouraging. "Thanks to your call, Ian, the group was caught, and many people were saved from being scammed." In the end, I decided to accept the letter of appreciation. The news of an unsuccessful comic artist like me receiving such an honor quickly spread online, and before long, job offers started pouring in. It was surreal, like a dream I hadn't dared to believe in. When I began writing a comic modeled on Owen, it became an unexpected hit. The story of the little white hamster, named after my beloved pet, resonated with readers far and wide. The comic was soon adapted into an anime, and merchandise featuring Owen flew off the shelves. I was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, my name and work gaining fame almost overnight. But despite the newfound success, I never forgot the truth, that my current life was only possible because of Willow and the police officers who had come to our aid that fateful day. Owen, our beloved hamster, became a symbol of the life we had built together, a life filled with love, support, and resilience. From now on, I vowed to cherish every moment with Willow and Owen, to savor the simple joys of our everyday life, and to never take for granted the incredible stroke of luck that had turned our world around. As I stood by the window, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the city, I smiled, feeling a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't felt in years. Thank you for watching until the end. How did you like this story? Subscribing to the channel would be a great encouragement for our production. See you in the next video. This version of the story is expanded